Morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is a typical homestead you see in rural Zimbabwe. How is it possible that in this, the 21st century, millions of Zimbabweans are being forced to live in such abject poverty? And yet it is true. I say forced because it is true. They are forced. I believe that millions of Zimbabweans would have built for themselves a decent homestead if they were given title deeds to the land on which their homes stand. But even going back to the white Ian Smith regime days, the whites stubbornly refused to give blacks title deeds. Blacks were allowed to settle in what was called communal areas, where you do not own the land. The land is owned communally. And that means nobody owns the land. The late John Robertson, an economist and a banker, advised the then Prime Minister of Rhodesia, Ian Douglas Smith, that if he gave the Raw people title deeds to the land, they would not only build decent homesteads for themselves, but they will look after the land even better. They will be able to dig wells that they've got clean drinking water, plant fruit trees in their yards, and make all manner of improvements on the land. Confident that if they should ever want to move, they can sell the homestead and the developments they would have made on it. They've got economic value. If they should die on the land, they will leave their children and grandchildren a decent home to live in. Ian Smith refused the plan outright for the simple reason that he realized that giving the blacks ownership to the land will give them a foot onto the economic ladder. And Smith feared that the next thing the blacks would want is political power. Ironically, after independence, John Robertson gave the same plan to Robert Gabriel Mugabe and his Zanu PF friends. They too rejected the plan for exactly the same reason. They did not want the blacks, ordinary blacks, to have a foothold on the economic ladder, for fear the next thing they would want is political power. It's ironic that Zanu PF has made a big song and dance about its land distribution, claiming that it has been under economic sanctions from the West because it seized the land and gave it to the people. In theory, the land was supposed to go to the landless peasants. But in practice, it was the ruling elite who took on the farms themselves. This is Emerson Dambuzo Mnangagwa showing off one of his farms. So you can see, stretching as far as the eye can see, the maize field. The ruling elite have seized the white-owned farms, the former white-owned farms, for themselves. He has title deeds to that farm. And so does many of his fellow ruling elite cronies. In a recent case of former dictator Robert Gabriel Mugabe's wife's daughter, Bona Mugabe, divorcing her husband, it turned out that the couple had a staggering 12 farms, whose land total was so big that it was the equivalent of Lesotho. They had title deeds, and yet the regime has stubbornly refused to give the people in the rural area the right to own even 1 acre of land on which their homestead stand. So the sight of the poor, rural poor, sitting outside a mud hut is a common sight. Some things have not changed. And this is deliberate. People must understand that this is a deliberate policy on the part of Zanu PF. Here is Margaret Dongo, herself a former Zanu PF MP, who is now independent, pointing out that very problem of Zanu PF deliberately keeping the rural people poor.
They have wrong priorities, especially the current government. How can you go and build an airport which services a few people, and the majority are the elite and the so-called investors? Look at the rural. I made you come to interview me because I wanted you to have the experience of the roads that we are using. If we go today to our hospital there, you feel pity with that's a hospital in a rural area. If we go to our clinic, you feel pity. We have no piped water here. Do you know the reason why the rural people vote for Zanu PF? One, they're intimidated. Two, the policy is that the rural people should remain poor and subservient to the government. They should remain poor, because if they remain poor, they continue singing the song for their master. This is why these people have been impoverished. It's for a reason. Because at the moment, if you economic empower these people, they'll go out of hand. Zanu PF will never have control over them.
As much as some people would not want to admit it, but that is the truth. Zanu PF's so-called land redistribution benefited only a few raw people. They've been resettled on some of these seized farms. But even they were never really given any title deeds. They were given letters, offer letters, which can be withdrawn at the drop of a hat. And as for the millions of rural people, the regime stubbornly refused to give them not even title deeds to a few acres, the size of a football match. The regime still refused to give it to them for the simple reason that the regime wants to keep them poor and subservient to the regime. It is really tragic that we Zimbabweans, as a people, we've allowed this madness to continue into this, the 21st century. How we have allowed our fellow Zimbabweans to live in such abject poverty, millions of them, and never given a chance to improve their lives for political reasons. Beggars belief. It really is irresponsible. I think the 2028 election should have on the top of that agenda title deeds to people in the rural areas as well as people in the urban centers. We saw recently houses being demolished in urban centers under the pretext that the land had been allocated by land barons. The reason why those people would have built those houses is out of desperation. I believe many people would build a decent homestead in their rural home if they had title deeds. But because rural people are not given title deeds, they've got to go to the urban centers where at least they get title deeds to a stand. And in some of these cases, as we've seen, it turns out that the land barons, who are usually the ruling elite, are selling this land illegally. And so the poor Zimbabweans are finding themselves a victim of the regime twice over. The people are buying from land barons out of desperation. I think we have got to end this madness. Millions of people in this day and age should not have to live in this kind of structure. It's criminal, particularly when they are not asking government to build them a decent home. They can do it for themselves if they're given title deeds. Zanu PF must give people of Zimbabwe title deeds to the land. Enough is enough. Thank you very much, those of you who are able to join, and have a good day.